Welcome. Today is a very important day in the history of Antigua and Barbuda. Finally, we acknowledge and recognize Vigo Blake for the outstanding and monumental work he did, preparing the first school in the Caribbean for enslaved people. With me today is Mr. Ian Joseph. Mr. Joseph, give us a little background as to the organization who organized this day.
Okay, I always have to go back to 2016 when we had a reunion, the Bethesda Christian reunion, and we at that time concentrated on history. And I always have to give a plug to John Lawrence, because after reading her book, we started to go further back in history when we found out about, well, we knew vaguely that there was a school that enslaved people went to school, but the narrative was that there was a missionary who decided to teach black people. But after we dug deep, we found out that there was King Vigo Blake, who was the one who initiated the whole process. Hence, what we did today was long in coming, but I'm standing here and sacred proud to know that we pulled it off.
Gentlemen, could we begin by discussing the significance of today's activity?
Okay, let me say that today in the history of education in Antigua and Barbuda is most significant, because we are at the very spot, the very place where formal education for black people in the British-speaking Caribbean started. And right here in Bethesda is where it all started, right at this very spot. And it all started on the initiative of a slave that goes by the name of Vigo. Now he ended up with the surname Blake, as I understand today, because he was a slave on the Blake estate, which is just outside of Bethesda. And so, for us here in Bethesda, we have always enjoyed a very rich tradition, a rich history in producing well-known educators in this country. And so, it is I don't believe that it was any mistake that it all started right here. And so we want to celebrate Vigo and the work that he would have started in education in Antigua and Barbuda, as a matter of fact in the British West Indies. And so thankful to the committee members who would have come together and made sure that this event today, the unveiling of a plaque in honor of Vigo Blake at the very site where he constructed the first school for black people in the British West Indies.
I am just happy to be here in this moment celebrating this event. God is blessing us with showers, just as God would have blessed Vigo Blake and planted in his heart the confidence to approach the enslavers to say, we want education. We want education. Many of us in Antigua and Barbuda do not know the name Vigo Blake. In fact, until we would have started this event outside of Barbara Arundel and those who are of similar scholastic persuasion, who would have done research, the average Antiguan and Barbudan do not know the story of Vigo Blake. I want all of us to just do something for me right now. Even those on Zoom. Just close your eyes. Close your eyes. I want you to imagine life in Antigua and Barbuda in the 1800s. The life of our ancestors. The uncertainty of their existence. Families torn apart. Children born into bondage, not on account of anything they did wrong, but just as a matter of circumstance, that someone, a group of people, believed that it was okay to own other human beings, to treat other human beings as property. I want you to close your eyes. I don't want a distraction of the beauty that you're seeing in your neighbor right now. I want you to try to think back to 1830. The life of children born in that time, having to get up at the crack of dawn, till the soil, pick cotton, plant cane, plant food. What do they get in return? Lashes. Just enough to survive. And I want you to imagine a man who history told us, and we will hear more about from Bob, was a head enslaved person. And because of his position, he would have been able to move around the plantation perhaps a little bit more freely. He would see and the responses of the enslavers' children to education. He would have watched them grow and flourish on account of the knowledge gained. And in that moment, watching that move for a period of time, he would have had, and I see my good friend Paul, I use the term on Paul's show, the gumption. And Paul added the God to say, give my people education. Give my people education. May 29th, 1830. 21 years before the emancipation of slavery. While we were still not in control of our bodies. Give us education. And if you find a land to do so, we will build a school on our time. What little time that was. With your eyes closed, I want you to say his name. I want us to speak, echo, amplify, and punctuate the name Vigo Blake now and into the future, into our legacy, into our children, that they would know the sacrifice that he and his fellow enslavers made, and that we will never forget. Join me with your eyes closed. I just want you to sing. Vigo, Vigo.
The thing is ready. The science in place. Now, Ralph and I have been communicating at midnight, so you probably thought I was still awake, but I needed a proper night's sleep to come here, so I'm leaving them to put the sign in place. But what I thought of was that I'm pretty sure that Vigo probably left here around 11 o'clock the Friday evening, 208 years ago. He didn't WhatsApp anybody, but he probably passed a few people and said, the building is ready for school tomorrow. Think so? He got that message right. About halfway on their journey from English Harbor to Lyons Estate, there is a delightful spot, a gentle rising ground, covered with the smooth green grass, and here and there a forest of trees, open to the sweet and gentle breezes from Willoughby Bay. This was written in a book in 1856 by one John Horsford. The book is called A Voice from the West Indies. He doesn't just record that, but he records the name Vigo Blake, the head man on Blake's estate, seeing the want of such a central rendezvous, told Mr. and Mrs. Thwaites that if they could obtain leave from the proprietor, he and his fellow slaves would build a schoolroom on the very spot desired. And the rest is history. We know they did. So, like Ralph, I want to take you basically on a story, on a journey. And on this journey, we will meet a few people. And I want us to think about these people and think of the time they were in. And so, the story we're told is that many enslaved people were being taught at that point in time. In fact, I want to start our story in 1812, when Charles and his wife, Elizabeth, I'm guilty of usually saying Elizabeth Hart and her husband, Charles, because the Hart sisters are central to this whole thing, and they were black Antiguan women, free women at that time. So that couple would often go between English Harbor and Lyons Estate. We know where Lyons Estate is? Just up from Newfield? Good. So they would make that journey to celebrate service on that estate. And we're told that one Sunday, when the service ended, which means all the people from the plantation had ended their service, Mr. Thwaites was still hearing singing. Now, the singing should be coming from them, but there was still some people, children's voices, singing. And so he went to investigate. And he found what another writer describes as an old black man named Harry. This gentleman calls him Henry, but we know that's one and the same thing, right? So they found old Harry. And Harry was teaching catechism to a group of enslaved children. No, Charles was kind of like, what's going on? Because as far as they understood, they, the good Methodists, and some Anglicans and Moravians, were the ones teaching. Who is this, by description, old black man who was teaching? And what's going on here? And so they came to understand that the enslaved people of Antigua were already educating each other. I want us to understand that. We were already taking control of our lives 20 plus years before somebody said we are emancipating you. Alright? So, having happened upon Harry's little classroom, they recognized, well, is this happening elsewhere? And he said to Henry, tell you what, in a couple of weeks when we come back, I want you to gather all the people who are teaching like this and their children. Bring them together and let's see what we can do. Now, I wasn't there, but I have a feeling that Charles Thwaites expected a few dozen children, maybe 100. More than 400 enslaved children and adults turned up and said, we from this area, not the whole of Antigua, we from this area are busy being educated. Some of them were being educated by people who couldn't read and write themselves. Okay? So whatever they knew, they taught. They were learning poetry, they were learning songs, and some were learning to read and write, usually from the Bible. So we recognize that. We recognize then that although Charles and Elizabeth, as well as Elizabeth's sister Anne, were busy teaching in Sunday school normally, they knew now that there were more people out there who wanted an education. And the question was, how can we do this? Because we don't have a place. We can't move them from that estate and bring them over here. It won't be allowed. And so we can only imagine, because a lot of this we have to imagine, we can only imagine that at some point along the way they encountered Vigo. And I like to call him Vigo. Because Vigo, I want to assume, was his own name. Blake was attached to him because he was attached to Blake's estate. So they would have encountered Vigo. Vigo knew them. And as they did their little procession regularly from Lyon's estate to English Harbor, Vigo would have seen them. And at some point, Vigo said, because there would have been discussions going on, he said, look, if you can ask the people who own that piece of land, talk to them. If they will let you have the land, I can get the label and we can build it. And we're told that once permission was granted, the enslaved people, as well as some free black people, as well as others, came into this general area and they cut down trees and they made lawns and they made wood and they constructed something that was approximately 44 by 16 feet. Look at this building we're in right now. 16 feet does not fully take in past the door to just beyond where Peter is or where I'm standing. So it was that wide. I kind of did a rough count off, and this is a little bit more than 20 feet going across. So twice the distance. No? My calculator's got me wrong. But think of something that's not quite twice the size of where we are sitting right now. And that's what they built. Like, they didn't go out to Jews or Bryson's or somebody and buy some wood. They had to find the wood and the material, and they constructed this thing. Working every night, probably till 11 o'clock at night, and then going home. And there was no ride in the truck to get home. They were walking back home. I want us to understand the value of what was done here. And then to wake up the next morning and go to work, do what they were told to do, and then do it all over again for 6 weeks. The roof, we're told, was made of thatch. Do you understand what that is? Mm-hmm. The sugar cane. So that was just to keep out as much water as possible. But we also know that would have kept out everything. Under your feet right now, there are tiles. Under their feet was the earth. Charles and Elizabeth often didn't make it home at night, so they actually had a mattress that was curled up under a sink, and so sometimes they slept there. The only problem was that to start their day, they then had to remove the jiggers. You know those are? Okay. Not personally, thank God.
Explain.
But they would have had to remove them not only from their feet, but from their bodies. Again, I want us to understand the sacrifices made to ensure that every night, every day, more than 300 to 400 enslaved people, freed people, and impoverished white people were allowed or able to attend school. And how did school work? We're told that during the day, the people who had been discarded from the plantation, those who were maimed, there was apparently a lady who was blind, but many of the people who were no longer of any great importance, who had very simple jobs perhaps and were allowed to do their thing, waiting till their dying day, they were brought here during the day. And they were taught, because guess what? Whatever they learned during the day, when everybody else was working, they came back at night and they taught. This is our history. This is how we became who we are. This is why Antigua was considered one of the better educated colonies at the point of emancipation. And no, that's not why they set us quote unquote free in 1834. That was all about money. That's another lecture, another discussion. So we recognize what went on at that point in time. I want us to speak a little bit about the people. I want us to understand who the hearts were. just again so we can put it in context. But a man named Barry Hart, he owned an estate called Hotel Estate. He also, well, Barry Hart was a black man. He was described in one of these books. There are lovely books online that you can read. He was described, interestingly enough, as a free black man. So I'm trying to understand if he had been freed or if he was born free. But the fact that he was referred to as a free black man sort of suggests that he attained his freedom. His wife, however, whose name was also Anne, there are plenty of Annes in the story, by the way. His first wife, Anne, not to be confused with his second wife, Anne, his first wife, Anne, was described as a lady from a distinguished colored family in St. Kitts. Alright? He was a free black man. She was from a distinguished colored family in St. Kitts, the Clarkley family, who also had Antiguan roots. But again, just so we understand the difference in language and who they were. But they got married and they lived here, and they had a few children. The most noted ones were Anne and Elizabeth.
And again?
Anne and Elizabeth attained an education as would have happened on estates back then, because people were brought in to educate them. Alright? The Anglican Church may not have been as welcoming of the colored population at that point in time. So we're told in their early years, Anne and Elizabeth gravitated towards the Moravians. So any Moravians in the group here, you all almost got them. But then the Gilberts turned up. Well, Mr. Cope, you may have known the Methodist story, but they met these people who came in the early days, and they believed. And they believed in what the Methodists were saying. And so, first Elizabeth, the younger one, at 14, she accepted what was being taught. And then later, her older sister, 4 years older than her, Anne, they became Methodists, devout Methodists. Here's something interesting parts. Again, we want to know who they are. The thing is that these two free colored ladies, going about their business, one of Nathaniel Gilbert's nephews. Now, Mr. Hart trusted these people to come into his house, to work with his children, and the man decided he wanted to marry the man's daughter. Can you imagine in those days that Mr. Hart's quite comfortable in his estate, right? He's kind of worked out in his mind how we treat the enslaved people a little bit better than everybody else, so he's kind of worked out his conscience. But life is okay. We don't want to rock the boat. But they come to upset things by saying they want to marry one of his daughters. Anyway, Mr. Gilbert, Nathaniel Gilbert, who was there to save the enslaved people, he sent a message to every pastor, preacher, everybody, every ship's captain in the dockyard, and said, do not perform that ceremony. It is not to happen. It is illegal. I don't say this to malign the man who needed love good, but just so we understand how things were. And also so we can understand the Hart sisters and what they were doing, that they were daring to step outside of the norm. Historians argue about whether or not they were abolitionists or not. I don't care, they were doing good, and what they did helped to produce something else. And so, one sister married this guy. They had to leave the country, they came back and they were married. And then, this missionary named Thwaites turns up in Antigua. Again, Mr. Hart Foley welcome into his house, and history repeats itself. He got a job, because missionaries don't make plenty of money. I don't think that, I don't know how they do. Got a job in the dock as a clerk, and continued his work, establishing Sunday schools, establishing schoolrooms, various things, with his wife, who was known for her pony, going around the estates in this general area, carrying food, carrying hope with her. Right? These are the people we're talking about. And then enters Vigo. Who was Vigo? We hear about somebody else almost 100 years before who was referred to as the head slave for his person who said they owned him. So we know that head slaves were usually people of high intellect. They were trusted. Some head slaves were even overseers, allowed into the fields to carry out the work that quite often was done by white men. They were trusted. And having been involved with these Thwaites people, these Gilberts, he said, but the piece of land up here is just sitting there. We've heard that in Antigua as well, but different. It's just sitting there. Can they have it? Can they use it? And then he moved forward. He was a man of action. Unfortunately, although we know much about Elizabeth and Anne and Charles and Gilbert, we don't know very much about Vigo. Vigo's claim to fame was daring to believe that a school could be built and that he could take responsibility for building it. We don't really know if he had children, a wife. We don't know his dreams other than education. But we know that he was responsible and he accepted that responsibility. And so as I close off this morning, I hope that what you have gained here is a little bit of knowledge about this area in terms of that particular point in time, because I'm not in a position to teach you about Bethesda the place, just Bethesda the school. We know that 1813, today, 28 years ago, there were some children and adults learning in a place built specially for them. And that's the important thing. Children and adults, enslaved people were already learning. But they were not learning in a place that had been built for them to learn. And that's what was different about Bethesda. It was named Bethesda not on this Saturday, 28 years ago, it was just a schoolroom. But later on, an event happened, I won't get into detail about it, but it reminded Elizabeth of the story in the Bible concerning Bethesda and the healing powers of the water below. And that was when she decided this would become the holy place. Even though in her diary, she said it was a holy or a hallowed, merciful place for everybody except her and her husband, due to the Jiggers. That's where the Jiggers came into the story. She said it was not a great place for them because of that. So we understand that this place meant a lot to many. We understand that it started a process. We also know that the building established here in 1813 did not last forever. That in actual fact, at some point, the school was actually transferred to Hope's estate, not Betty's home, but Hope's estate, which was eventually part of Montpelier estate. But some people apparently decided to stay here anyway, even though the building was in a bad state. When we think of history, please don't think of it as a stagnant situation. 208 years is a long time. Think of all that happens to a typical building in the space of 10 years. You build your home and 10 years later, crap turned up and that, much less something which wasn't built in a sturdy manner. And so they would have rebuilt, they would have moved, they would have come back. But we know that somewhere on this hill, it started here, and over time it's continued here, even though it was eventually moved to another hill. But the Methodists would have continued here, teaching in another form, whether it be religious or otherwise. And so we celebrate this place. We celebrate Bethesda. We remember those who came a long time ago. We remember those who are here now. And we encourage everybody involved to learn more about the story. To learn more about the story of Antigua and Barbuda. Because the books are there. It's for us to go looking. Mm-hmm. And yes, as I read this book, part of it, I got annoyed sometimes with Mr. Hall, reading Horsford. Because we spoke about, for example, a very intelligent young boy. And he was just a field hand, a very dark boy. His level of intelligence was just incomprehensible. And I thought, really, Mr. Osmond? But we have to read it still, because from that we learn so much. And Mr. Moss was one of the good ones. Okay, so we understand that. He's one of the good ones. So thank you so much for listening. I hope we are motivated to learn more.
I'm here because I want to celebrate events that happened many years ago, which I think are important to our knowledge of our history and understanding of where we came from. I believe firmly that if you know your history, then you can draw on the past and celebrate it, and it will assist in the development for the future. So that's why I'm here.
I was in Africa a few years ago, and I visited a site, and it was a site of slavery. It was the first time that I literally cried, because before you actually enter the site, you had to take your shoes off, and it was deemed as a very sacred ground. Today, I consider this site very sacred to me, and those who are here also. I think the next time we do have an event like this, we should probably practice that ritual of everybody take their shoes off at the entrance and just walk along the path where the school was erected. And we have the Bethesda Christian here last in New York. I really appreciate everything that those folks on the ground have done to bring this whole thing to fruition. This was something that we have contemplated for years, and I'm really just delighted to see that it's really come to pass.
Why is today important to you? What's the significance of today?
Today is very important to me because here is where I went to school at age 5, and here is where my what I have now started. From here, I not only school but church, because I'm a Methodist. I was confirmed here. Here's where I went to school. From here, I left and went up to Cochrane, where we call it Big School is. So I'm so happy when my daughter showed me the invitation. I said, I have to be here. And here is where I am, and it was very, very how should I say, informative, and I'm glad I came.
Daughter?
1 second. Today was very important to me, actually. I'm happy to know that my mom came here, and my daughter is here with me today, who actually came and learned some of the history. And I also attended
the other side,
the new Bethesda School. So I'm happy I came today. It was quite good.
What do you think is valuable about this for our history as Antiguans and Barbudans? Anything?
Well, definitely. I hope that this is documented so that those coming up would also come and learn about the history that happened so many years ago. And it's important, and we should be in our history books. And as Patty say, our story.
Daughter, anything you want to add? You look beautiful, by the way.
Thank you. I'm not really from Bethesda, but from all the stories my grandmother told me of her going to school, it's really like a memorable. It's really memorable to her.
Thank you.
We are pleased that all of you have come out and journeyed here with us at Bethesda this morning to unveil what we consider as the first step on the journey to Bethesda School. Yes, it's the first step. And so, without any further ado, we will just unveil what we have. This is a temporary monument that we're placing here because the church has intention of doing some renovation, and we didn't want to put down something permanent and then they would have to move it. So when they finished doing the renovation, then we put down the permanent monument for Vigo. So presently what we have, ladies and gentlemen, Vigo Blake, Bethesda Day.
Rav, this very important initiative, what's next? What's the next step?
Well, the next step is for us as the descendants of Vigo Blake to utilize that energy, that commitment that he had for education to ensure that the Bethesda School, now known as the Bethesda Primary School, is rebuilt. Not rebuilt in the sense of a repair putting on the roof of a 1960s educational plant to educate children to compete in the 21st century, but rather to make it the preeminent educational institution in Antigua and Barbuda. We want to build something befitting of the legacy of Vigo Blake and the other enslaved people. We know the name Vigo Blake, but we also know that he didn't do it on his own or by himself. So we want to build something as revolutionary today as that school was in 1813. So when we build a school, we're talking about doing a primary school, secondary school, agricultural institute, a technical training institute, as well as having adult education for people who may have left school needing to have subjects to qualify for university or just learning to read. Because there are a good number of people in Antigua and Barbuda who are adults who just don't read well for a variety of reasons. So we're building on that legacy and building an educational plant. A good thing we have people like Foster who are in education in a formal way, and they obviously will provide a technical advice as to what would be necessary. But when children graduate the school that we are intending to build, they should be able to compete, as my good brother said yesterday, anywhere in the world, at any time, with anyone.
We had a small ceremony today of a very important national event. Would you be lobbying, both of you and the committee, for us to embrace this as a national initiative where perhaps May 29th becomes recognized as Vigo Day?
Absolutely. Look, that is the whole idea. History happens in any country in a small footprint or on a small footprint. We are blessed in Bethesda to have the footprint of the first institution to educate black people formally be in Bethesda or in the community of Bethesda. Quite frankly, as you would have heard before, the community came up around the school. The community got its name from the school predating the village. 21 years before the emancipation of slavery, you know, there were no villages in Antigua and Barbuda. So the school existed prior to the village. Another first, another uniqueness of this community, because I don't think that has happened anywhere else. Certainly nowhere else, maybe even in the English-speaking Caribbean. But the idea of recognizing the monumental effort of Vigo Blake and the other enslaved people who worked along with him. This is a national effort. So the footprint is in Bethesda, but the footprint is also in Antigua and Barbuda because Bethesda is in Antigua and Barbuda. So this is not a community effort. We're not looking to build a community school. We're looking to build an educational facility that children can be bused from all over Antigua and Barbuda to attend there to get the type of education that is going to be necessary to lift them up and to make them compete, and also to make Antigua and Barbuda more competitive. Wiser population, more productive population.
Yeah, it is important that we also recognize that in all of this, what we're saying is that the way in which we ought to be educating our young people is so that they can be competitive wherever they find themselves. And it should not just be a Bethesda or just an Antiguan thing. Once you are educated at this institution, you can compete with anybody from Harvard, from wherever they come from, you should be able to compete with them, because we want to offer a 21st century type of education to our children.
So my last point, let's suppose that someone out there somewhere gets to see this and they want to make a contribution. How do they contact?
Well, the Bethesda School Heritage Foundation, Inc. is a registered not-for-profit corporation in Antigua and Barbuda. We have been registered now for a couple of months, but we are putting all of the mechanism in place before we start accepting monies. Okay. We don't want to just be accepting monies without being able to account for monies. So we have engaged a couple of CPAs who are volunteering their time, putting together an accounting system for us. We are going to be approaching one of the major auditing firms, maybe a PricewaterhouseCoopers or one of the others that has an international reputation, who would be our auditors. And once those things are in place, then we will start accepting donations. We have a number of people who have called who want to make donations, but we want to make sure that we can account for the money. Look, Peter, it may sound as if this is a difficult thing to accomplish, but it's really not. As Foster and I are standing here, and with you and my cousin over off camera, it is easier for us to rebuild Bethesda School in 2021 than it was for Vigo Blake and his enslaved people to do it in 1813. And we want to tap into that same volunteerism that took place then. If enslaved people could volunteer what minimal time off they had to build a school for the greater good, for the greater community, then freed men and women who would have benefited from that effort should be willing to volunteer. So we're looking for accountants to volunteer. We're looking for finance people to volunteer. The auditing firm that we're going to approach, we're going to ask them to volunteer.
The website
we
builder.
have construction people. I have construction friends in New York who have been hearing this story, and also, of course, Antigua and Barbuda, who are saying, look, whenever you start, just let us know. We will take time off and come down and give time. And again, just think about it. Let's assume that there are 100,000 working Antiguans and Barbudans at home and in the diaspora. Just assume, let's pick a number, right? If everyone gives $100, that's $10 million. Some people will give more. Some people, we haven't even gotten to the corporations yet. And by the way, so that people understand how deeply we have thought through this process, we know that a number of major educational, tertiary educational institutions around the world have benefited from the slave trade in Antigua and Barbuda. In fact, the endowment that started many of the schools, including Harvard Law School, came from a enslaver in Antigua and Barbuda. So we want to link with them, tap into them, to say, look, as part of the reparatory justice, the students that graduate from this institution, we can get scholarships for them in the institution, as well as to help them. They can help us develop the curriculum so that the children will be prepared to compete with anyone. So this is something that we're looking to do. It's not, and you know, we always have to say when we're doing things in Antigua and Barbuda, because we already hear it. There's nothing political about what we're doing. Right? It's unfortunate that we have to say that, but I agree. But I think it bears repeating. Because we already hear people say when we speak about the conditions of the school, that is politics. We don't talk politics. It doesn't matter who made the decision to close the school is closed. That is our reality. Now we step off from here to the next step. And we want everybody, no matter your political persuasion, which is your right, to join forces with us to make sure that we can create an institution. So when we say education for black people started in Antigua and Barbuda and in the Bethesda community, and we point, and it's so easy to point to because it's up on the hill. Yes. And we point to that institution is going to be the beacon. And believe it or not, that effort, in our opinion, will then redound to all of the other schools in Antigua and Barbuda, because we will get resources and we will share those resources. So we can lift all the schools, lift all our children, and in so doing lift our country.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.